Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. It's middle of winter, snow on the ground. The bees have been prepared for winter, but you know that some of them probably were a little lighter than you'd like to see them to have been. So I'm going to prepare some supplemental feeds, winter patties or sugar cakes or sugar candy, whatever you like to call it. So some supplemental feeds that we can give the bees during the winter time to help them through, just to make those honey resources last a bit longer, to get them through to the spring when we can start feeding them sugar syrup. So I'm going to show you how I go about making those feeds. Okay, we'll start off making the basic sugar syrup. So, sorry, let me get the basic sugar, the candy if you like. Now the ratios that I'll use here are not particularly, don't need to be exact. So I'm going to take make up very approximate quantities here. So I'm going to make about 15 pounds or so. So I'm just going to estimate your right quantity. Now, it's easier if you're doing that sort of quantity to do it about half at a time. Probably a bit easier if I put it on the floor to start with. So, with the sugar here, I put roughly 7 or 8 pounds of sugar in there. The ratios I want to use is a roughly 5 parts sugar. For every 5 pounds of sugar, I want to use roughly 1 cup of liquid. Yes, interesting, isn't it? Okay, so I've got about 1.5 times that here at the moment, so I've got 2 cups of water here. So I'll add about half this water. That's about a cup and a half of water. But I'm also going to add a bit of cider vinegar. That inverts the sugar. It's a process which makes it nearer to what the bees would naturally be consuming by adding some acidification to it. Now there's a number of different recipes which might involve using something like citric acid, that sort of thing. You'll see a lot of different recipes online, all of which will work. Basically what you're looking to do is get sugar in the hive. You can simply pour white granulated sugar in the hive, but this will be in a form which is easier to transport and put in the hive in a measured way. So I'm just going to mix this up now. So I'm using just a drill with a paint mixer on it. So this will just take a few minutes. And what I'm looking to do is make the sugar damp enough to mold, like wet sand, like you're building a sandcastle, but not so dry, not as dry as to fall apart. I don't want it wet because then it'll just slump down into the frames and damage the hive, damage the bees. So I just want it to be something which you can mold. This is still too wet right now, so I'm going to keep on mixing it with the dry sugar. I want to break up those lumps. And if you like, you can also add a bit of feeding stimulant to it. You can give them some of this stuff. The Honey Bee Healthy. It's got things like lemongrass oil. So I'm going to mix it with the water so I don't overdo it. So that's going to be more than enough. I'll just add sugar when I need to. So again, I'm going to do roughly 1 cup for every 5 pounds of sugar. So I'm adding a bit more sugar here. I'm getting close now, pretty close to that 15-pound mark. I add the rest of my liquid and a little more vinegar. And as I say, you can do this by eye until you're satisfied with the consistency of the sugar that you've made. And what we're going to do is, once we've mixed it up enough, we're going to put it into the mold, pack it and squeeze it tight, and leave it overnight before putting it into any hive. That's looking kind of like what I want to do. That's just about right, but I'm going to mix it all up because it's not going to be thoroughly mixed yet, but that top bit is... Right, now during the winter time, it's important that all we're feeding them is the sugar element of their diet, not the protein element of their diet. So some people confuse winter patties or sugar patties or winter cakes or sugar cakes or candy. They confuse it with pollen patties. Don't do that. Pollen patties are basically the substitute for protein or a mixture of pollen and sugar. And it's a high protein which starts to stimulate the bees to produce brood. Now, we're talking about feeding in January and February and March right here in Maine. It's way too early to stimulate brood production. Now, if you know what you're doing a little bit later, late March, April, stimulating brood production is okay as long as you know what you're doing and you have plenty of food resources in the form of sugar along with that. Sugar preferably having plenty of honey in the hive before you do that. But we're just going to concentrate on getting the bees through the winter right now. So now I've got the sugar mixed up to the consistency that I'm looking for. I've got a few options of how I'm going to present that to the bees. So, a simple one, you can simply go in with a sheet of newspaper, put that on top of the frames in your feeding rim, and just simply put this in, and it's going to be it's going to be in a form ready for the bees. But let's look at a few options here. First of all, let's look at making a candy board. The candy board is basically the feeding rim, which I will typically normally use on the hive with an upper entrance and room to put food in. But I've added a piece of hardwire cloth with 1/2-inch wire mesh on it. Now this gives me the capacity to hold a lot of sugar. So if your hive needs a lot of feeding, I'll set up some of these in the fall. And so what I'll do, we'll make a big one first of all. And this, I'm making it very roughly, but I'd say that what we're making here is going to be close to a 4 or 5 pound board. Now, I just forgot what I was going to do here. One thing I was going to do is make an entrance here, because I want to make sure bees can get in and out of that entrance. So what I'm going to do is put this piece of wood in place, which I should have done to start with. Then I'll use something to pack this sugar down with. First of all, fill in the gaps. So I'm just packing it down. anything that's loose there, just pack it down. And then I'll just let it dry overnight, preferably overnight, maybe a day or two. Now, what I can also do now is, if I take this out, if I take this and put it on the hive, what you'll see I've got here is a way for the bees underneath can come up and go in and out of the entrance. So air can come up and bees can come up and not only feed from underneath, if you can see that, but they can also feed from the top if they need to. So basically the bees can come up and in and out of the entrance as normal. This will also act like a moisture absorbing material, because the sugar will absorb moisture from the air. So I'll just let that dry, and that'll be good for a hive that's getting very low on food resources. I'll just swap out the feeding room. Now, alternatively, what I can do is make smaller, more manageable winter patties, or feeding patties. So your hands get nice and sticky doing this. So I'm just going to pack that down. And there's one that's going to be roughly 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds. Should fit inside. I don't want to have them too full, so they can fit inside the feeding rim. But that's going to be, 3/4 of an inch thick, couple of centimeters, which will fit in the feeding rim quite well. So I can just let that dry out as well. And tomorrow, if I just pop it out, I'm going to have a little brick of sugar. What I have also done, you can use anything for a mold. So another thing you can use is something like a frame, a shallow frame or a medium frame. And if you want to be nice and neat about it, just take some wax paper. Which is wonderful to handle when you've got sugar-coated hands. Let me just get a sheet of that. Okay, look, it's the right size. Put that over the frame. And again, just sort of scoop it in. And you don't have to be exact. What we're looking to do is have little blocks of sugar that we can place inside the hive. So we'll pat that down, fill up the gaps. Don't want it too thick. And that can easily be about 2 pounds of sugar. I'll use this to flatten it out. You can use anything to compress it. So there we have one brick, which I can just let dry like this, and I can break it in half, or I can just take it as a whole when it's solidified. Tomorrow will probably be just about able to move it around, probably a couple of days. And what we can do if we want to accelerate this process, if you take a standard fan and just blow air across it, higher temperatures will make it work even better. It'll also help the inversion of the sugar. So I'm doing it in a relatively cool barn. It's not ideal, but if you have it in a nice warm room, or have a fan blowing across it, number one, it gets rid of some of that vinegar smell from it, which I'm not too keen on putting on in the hive, but also it dries up your brick and makes it a little bit easier less crumbly. So these will be ready in a day or so to put in the hive, and that will keep the bees going for considerably longer. This is not for you. You're not to eat this, okay? Right. I'll take the dogs out of the area, and we'll hopefully not need them, as I hope that the hives have plenty of honey to start with, but I'm sure I'm going to come across a few that need some supplemental feeding. So this is one way of doing it. An alternative way of feeding the bees is to use winter patties. These are the sort of things you can buy in most beekeeping supply stores. They have a very low protein content, but they've got a few of the extra vitamins and minerals added to them, but they're more or less just sugar. So this and this, same sort of thing, but this will cost you quite a bit more. So this is a way you can do it at home and supplement your bees feeding, but in a pinch you can always nip into the local bee supply store and get your winter patties. So remember, not pollen patties at this time of year. So I hope that was helpful. I'll be doing more tips. I'm going to be out there this week hefting my hives, checking the weights and checking my other yards as well, see how they're doing, and making a note of any hives that feel a bit light, and I'll go out there and start feeding them with some of the stuff that I'll be making through the week. So if you like the information that you've had and found it helpful, please press that subscribe button, like or share the video. I'd really appreciate it. It'll help my channel grow. I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.